This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Care Notes with Doug Wilber from Cherish Companions. And I know it's been probably a good 2 months since we've had a podcast. Many things got interrupted. Not only did I fall and break my wrist, and I should know better, I should be more careful, but accidents do happen. But we also had internet accidents going on. Zoom just did not want to work. And I finally found out last week that the tower that I was being directed to has been down for 2.5 months. So therefore, when I was going to it, it was dropping. So got that all resolved, and I think we're back on plan for now. So tell us, Doug, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, we're going to talk about the very interesting, at least for those of us in healthcare or home care, um, a topic of preventing hospital readmissions. Um, I know that may not be like on everyone's top list, although if you have a family member, it's a big deal because people tend to cycle through the hospitals when they get older. Um, and if you can keep someone safe at home and keep them at home, it makes a huge difference in the end, in just quality of life and even longevity, because there's lots of things that can happen in hospitals that aren't good,
Sure.
And as well as things that happen in the hospital that are good. And so and probably it should start with the idea that this is a problem. And what I mean by that is that nearly 1 in 5 seniors discharged from the hospital end up back within 30 days.
Wow.
And here's the critical thing. Most of those readmissions are preventable. Not some, but most of those are preventable. Um, when you think about someone who's older, they've been in the hospital. And I can tell you, when someone ends up in the hospital, once they get over the critical phase, if there's something really big going on, what ends up happening next is this idea of, when can I get home? I just want to get home, and it becomes almost an obsession. So it is stressful for the person that wants to get home, but it's also stressful for the family members because not only the visiting the hospital and other things like that, it carries a cost because people are taking off work and other things. But there's also just the stress of driving into town and or to the hospital and giving up things that you're wanting to do in order to do something that you need to do, which is give support to your family members. And so and that's just the very beginning of things, because people very rarely come out of the hospital in a better state than they did, say, a week before they went into the hospital. Oftentimes, you have some sort of a event, and then someone ends up at the hospital, and that drives that. But they're not coming out in a better place than they were, you know, fairly close to
Sure.
prior to being admitted to the hospital. They're usually in a degraded state, and so and it's a long haul to get someone back. So what we want to do is get them home, get them better, and have them stay there unless something inevitable or that there or they can't be prevented happens
Sure.
again. So um, so anyway, you kind of ask, well, why do hospital readmissions happen? And I'll tell you, there are really a handful of things that happen. as I mentioned, people are weakened when they come back. Um, so, what would you imagine is the biggest danger for someone that is weak?
Probably falling.
Yeah, exactly. The fall, the physical weakness, and and you may have something to say about falls, but they're not good.
No, they're not.
And so what might not seem like a big deal if you're 5 years old becomes a much bigger deal when we pass 60 or probably past 50.
Yeah,
And so that weakness leads to the possibility of a fall. Um, Medication mismanagement. I think we've talked about this before, but I see people coming out of the hospital, they don't take their medicines, they're not even able to sometimes to get their medicines that they were prescribed, and they miss the dose, they're confused about the prescription, they double up because they are sent home a prescription that may overlap with something that they have, and so before you know it, medicine mismanagement has caused them to go back into the
right.
hospital. um, Another big deal is follow-up care. I mean, we don't always think about it, but if someone's by themselves at home, family is far away, what's likely to happen is they may not have a way to get to their appointments. So what do? They skip their appointments, and so they can't get the follow-up care that is necessary when you've had the
Sure.
hospitalization. So, and then the things that if you come home in a weakened state, it may be hard for someone to even get a glass of water or to get uh, proper food. They may not even have um, the ability to make themselves, if they even have it in their freezer, Stouffer's frozen
Sure.
dinner of some sort, and so they'll oftentimes go without food or water in the proper amount. It's not that they necessarily miss everything, but they can miss enough that that weakened state becomes an even more weakened state,
Right.
and so it's a problem. And I could probably tell you 100 stories right now of situations that I've seen that followed each one of these different scenarios. It is so common that it's become a pattern. So it's so much so that I tell people when I'm meeting with them, overestimate your need in going home. And if you want to cut back, but don't underestimate your need, because the cost of underestimating your need might be that you're back in the hospital.
Sure.
You know, so I don't know. You've personally kind of gone through this now. You have support and other things, but um, can any of these relate, like how you feel in coming out of a hospital?
It's interesting because when I broke my wrist, as I told you before we went on air, my husband was recovering from something. And so he wasn't supposed to drive, he wasn't supposed to lift anything. In fact, they basically said, sit on your recliner for the next 3 days. And here I
Mm.
am, you know, I'm bleeding. I know there's something wrong with my arm, don't know what it is. And so he did drive me to the hospital. And, but in the hospital, it was interesting. They determined they couldn't talk to me for some reason. So they were
Mm.
talking over me to my husband. And my husband was still somewhat medicated from his procedure the day before. And he was
Oh,
making no
yeah.
sense in the conversation. And they said to they said to me, "Do you understand what we're talking about?" I said, "Yes." Other than that, my arm it's painful. I can hear and absorb everything. And they went through some things with me, and they said, when you get home, we don't want you to use that arm at all. We need you to drink plenty of fluids. And I hadn't eaten yet that day. And you have to have a meal. And I'm looking at my husband, who barely will make a Stouffer's meal. Okay. And I'm thinking,
And boy, am I in trouble.
what do I do? And all I could think of was, okay, Uber Eats, and that's what we're
Right.
going to do. And so I planned it, but I can't imagine if this was more than just a wrist injury. You know, I did hit my head, but I didn't black out or anything. But if that had happened, who was going to take care of me?
Yeah.
And my husband knows that he's not supposed to be doing anything. And so the two of us felt like, who's going to help? Um,
Right.
but we got it together. But my fear was that one of us really was going to end up in the hospital in the next day or so.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
Well, and you hit on certain things that I think um, are really kind of critical feelings that so oftentimes happens because our reaction is often with fear. Like, what am I going to do? And there is a definite personal toll to hospitalizations, and there's you double that or triple that or quadruple it when it's a readmission because it's like this fear, this loss of control that people are feeling, the loss of independence, that kind of emotional strain that hits you. And I'm sure that not only were you feeling that, but your spouse, I'm sure, was feeling the
oh,
same thing.
absolutely.
Yeah, like um, and and every time you go into the hospital, the other thing we know is one, it costs Medicare billions of dollars each year every time someone goes back into the hospital. But that brings more bills to you,
Right.
and because we all have part of this that we're responsible for, and that unexpected thing is a very unpleasant surprise to have. It's different if you're planning on things, but if you're not planning on it, those bills can sometimes feel insurmountable at
Absolutely.
times. So much so that I think a lot of times people do the worst of all things and they don't go into the hospital at all. And sometimes that can lead to the worst outcomes, which is letting things go to the point that it may not be fixable. And
Exactly.
yeah, and then obviously, you know, any type of hospitalization is going to put a strain on the system, because right now hospitals tend to be pretty full. And it kind of depends on it. It kind of comes and goes, but when the hospitals, when you have a readmission, it's kind of like this is this is a dumb way to use our hospital space.
Can I ask you a question? Is there
Sure.
more readmission from people who are living in facilities compared to people who are living at home with a home care provider? And the reason I ask is I have a friend whose mother has been in and out of the hospital. She lives in a facility. It actually happens to be a very nice one. They pay a lot of money there. But when she came back the first time, certain needs that she had were not met the way they needed to be met. And she did get out of bed and she did fall and she had a concussion. So she ended up in the hospital. She recovered from that, went back, and something either happened in the hospital when she came back, and now she had a urinary infection, which they
Hmm.
felt they couldn't handle at the facility. So she went back again. She was back like 2 or 3 times. And one of the nurses finally said to my friend, they said, do yourself a favor. If your mother can come live with you, why don't you have a healthcare worker in the home to help out?
Mm,
Because then you will notice things, because that person's going to be responsible to paying attention to them. Whereas in the facility, it could be a different person every shift and even every day. It doesn't necessarily the same person. So they may not notice changes.
yeah, oh yeah. Um, so I don't know exactly what the statistics are, but I can tell you anecdotally, what I that nurse had said, I think is pretty accurate. When when you're in a facility, one of the things that happens is you have turns of staff. So someone may come in, and you see this with any type of institutional setting. Um, Someone comes in and they'll see someone where they are right then, and they may not know that that's different than it was 8 hours ago because it's a new shift. So you have new eyes, and if you haven't passed the baton well in shift transition, or even if you have just by capacity, um, it may be really difficult for that person know, is this normal or is this not normal? Is this what the person was like, or
Earlier, yep,
yeah, earlier in the day, or is there something that different that happens? And when you have a consistent set of caregivers for that individual, or a single caregiver, you are less likely to have a problem because you're monitoring those changes in condition in a much more personal way because they're really watching that individual
right,
and they don't have multiple. And even the capacity when you're dealing with multiple things, you're not noticing things as much, or most people wouldn't be.
right,
Yeah, but if you have one person that you're taking care of, you are going to notice those differences, or you're more likely to notice those differences. And so one of the things we know that is the caregivers that are oftentimes the first to know those warning signs before they become emergencies. So that whole monitoring or changing conditions is one of the big things about home care that I think is extraordinary. Or if not home care, you can get a similar thing by just having one aide that is there, because what we see sometimes is whether it be in a facility or in a hospital that families will hire an aide to come in just to be a new set of eyes, or another
uh-huh,
set of eyes, making sure they're seeing things quickly before they become a bigger problem. Um, the other big thing is aids prevent a lot of falls, whether it be someone trying to get up when they shouldn't be getting up because they're out of their mind because
right,
they are a little bit or have a bit of that delirium, or they think they can get up because they've always gotten up and they just get up and they're kind of weaving and because they don't have the balance or strength because of having been in the hospital. Those things make a big difference.
absolutely,
Keeping someone on track with their medicines. I cannot emphasize how important medicine reminders. It plays such an important part of it. And we already talked about the nutrition and hydration, transportation, and getting people to their doctor's appointments. Those things um, are are all critical, and that's where the one-on-one, whether it be a family care member, a someone who is doing caregiving as a family member, or whether it has, or it's a professional aid like what we can provide. The point that that nurse had made, I think, was really, really on target because all of those things end up getting hit by
Absolutely.
having someone who is just focusing in on that person. And I think that's where the facilities could easily fail because they're really focusing not on that type of client and their needs because they're so often focusing on someone who is, let's say it's assisted living, where they just need some help, not like a lot of hands-on type of help. So, um, the I do think that um, the readmissions are so important. We're going to be developing over time more telehealth type of monitoring that and ability for caregivers and nurses and doctors to have a little bit better seamless communication because when if someone's kind of having some issues when they get home, catching it early is really important, but then being able to intervene is also really important as well. So you're not only catching those things, but you're able to then get action. And I would say right now the action part is a little bit hard because if you don't have a great kind of connection with doctors or others, um, sometimes that ability to say, hey, my mom seems more confused, and being able to intervene. Obviously you can um, uh, uh, do certain things just because of that confusion, but if you had a way to communicate to your doctor quicker and then get a response to me or a nurse, I think with say a prescription or other things, I think that will, at least in the future, play a much bigger part of things. We really need to get Medicare to understand how important in-home support is. These Advantage plans, they promise and they do a lot of things, but if they could just get people in, for a period of time after someone has left the hospital or left the rehab, and actually pay for it, I think it'll make a difference. And I think that's one of the things we need to be pushing Medicare Advantage plans in that direction.
Because it's interesting because Medicare will pay for OT and PT in your home.
Right.
Yet, if you needed somebody to come into the home for a couple of hours to help with your medication or other things, obviously they don't pay for it. And I just, I know when I broke my shoulder and they said, oh, you can have OT at home. In fact, we're going to recommend it. It was like, well, I had a way to get to, therapy. I didn't
Yeah.
need it in the home, you know, but what I did need back then, because I was armless for a while, would have been some
Was it?
support in the home. Now, as you talk about some of these things, my brother, who's just turned 83, um, he has suffered, I'm going to use that word strongly, suffered from diabetes that
Hmm.
for the last 27 years was treated incorrectly.
Wow.
So he's type 2 and he was put on full dose insulin right in the beginning. And he has not been able to control his diabetes. So
Hmm.
he had some sort of incident that got him into the hospital. To this day, I don't know exactly what it was. He was there for 4 days. They had to take him off insulin because insulin has degraded a lot of his body. And they put him on one of these injectables.
Oh, like Ozempic type of
Yeah.
a product. Yeah.
But they didn't tell him to stop the insulin. So they said, you're going to go on this. No other
Hmm.
instructions. They showed him how to use it. He didn't realize while he was in the hospital he wasn't getting insulin. It didn't phase him
Oh,
because
yeah.
he went home and he took his blood before he went to eat, and his blood level was up. So he knew he had to take the insulin, gave himself the insulin, and he almost went into diabetic shock.
Wow.
And maybe he didn't hear what they told him. But one of the things that I like that we get in our hospitals is that I get a summary
Yeah.
after I've been seen. In fact, when I tell them, well, I can get it online, they say, no, you're going to wait. We're going to give it to you so that either you, your husband, or somebody else will know what's going on. And
Yeah.
we'll tell you what drugs you can't take anymore, what drugs you have to take. That I think is extremely important for us to understand and for medical facilities to make sure they give us the right information.
Yeah. It's extraordinary how often I see that people come home from the hospital and truly don't understand
Yep.
what's gone on. I mean, and you almost need a translator, someone who goes step by step and says do this or not. But the problem is we remember what, seven things in short-term memory. So someone you're thinking about going home, you have all this stuff going on, you're in the hospital. They come and sit down and they talk to you about, what's going on. They're going point, 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 and and then you go and you remember, a really small portion of
Right.
that. And then we wonder why there are errors when someone goes home. My guess is they probably said something, to him at some point in time, but there's
You
just
didn't
so
catch it.
much information that's coming at
Right.
you that you really just, it's really hard to fully comprehend what they're saying, and especially when you add on that most people are not medical, and doctors, and even good doctors, will use terms that really, you know we're not normally using in day-to-day
Yeah.
life. And maybe, the maybe even they think that it's kind of dumbing down the language to kind of like regular lay language, but it may not be something um that people are really piecing together the parts. And one of the things that I found that is such a big deal is we oftentimes aren't giving people the why. And if you don't get the why of why things are being done or how they're being done, you tend not to put the full context of what this means. So, if I know there are times where someone will say to me, I wish my doctor was telling me, had told me the things that you're telling. Now, I'm not telling them anything that, you know, um, is extraordinary. I'm just taking the time to tell them, this is why they use this particular medicine, for a lot of people with this condition, you know, and oh, I never knew that's why that was being used. My doctor just told me take it,
Yeah.
and and so the whole context of why someone takes something or doesn't take, um, uh, you know, um, helps to make you remember things, or allows you to remember things, because now it makes sense. Now
Exactly.
it has meaning. So, um, but I think the probably the most important uh, takeaway that I would have for this is that home care isn't just about comfort. It's a powerful way of keeping seniors safe and healthy and independent while reducing those hospital returns. So the example of your brother, if I might,
Yep.
what if someone else was there to help to listen, to be there to kind of say, oh, they told you to discontinue this, and then look over the paperwork that can
Right.
feel very confusing, even if he got it. He might not understand, oh, they discontinued this medicine because the assumption I've been on this medicine for, you
Yep.
said many years,
Yep.
that to go off it probably seems completely, out of the blue for someone who's been on it for 30 years or whatever it is that he's been on it. And I do think that having someone else there could make a difference. And if it's not a family member, maybe it's an aide that was
Right.
there taking notes and trying to figure things out. I'm not saying that he in particular needs it, but that would be an example of where if someone else had been there, it could have made a difference potentially.
Well, and that's one of the decisions my other brother and I came to, and the three of us have talked, and we've said to him that he needed somebody to help him sort out his medicines because his eyesight isn't that great, and he needs to make sure he's taking it right. So we did hire somebody who comes in weekly, and she's available by phone if he has any questions. So
Oh,
she
good.
knows what's in all the packets. And so do I, because if he wants to call me and say to me, it's Wednesday evening, what am I supposed to take? I even know what the pills look like. Um, and so we decided to help him along those lines. But we didn't think about it before this incident. He's my big brother. He's okay, and he takes care of himself. And um, it was an eye opener for both my other brother and I, and
Yeah.
it made us become more aware. Telling our own adult children certain things about our health conditions, just so that you know they don't get surprised someday. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. No, that's good. And it really does drive home the point that I had said before, which is it is so often those medication errors that end up getting someone back in the hospital. That was a, a thing where there was a change and where there was, an add-on and a takeaway,
yep,
and only half of that got understood.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
and that what a and it's a perfect example because that is a preventable thing. With something being changed, whether it be in the system or something being changed in, having added support, those are things that can prevent a bigger problem. And fortunately, he didn't totally crash.
Yes, they all
Yeah,
very lucky. Absolutely.
yeah. So, I mean, the big thing is with the right support, seniors can do well at home and they can kind of avoid that revolving door, with keeping on going back to the hospital. And that is such an issue. Like I said before, it is so often that these readmission occurs that they are now building into the system incentives to prevent the readmissions, where hospitals actually get paid better or more when you don't have the readmission. So the hospitals do actually have some skin in the game with this. So I'm hoping more and more people will be sending folks home with the right safety net, with the right, structure or making the suggestions that things be built in or baked in, frankly, the best way to start it is by preventing it ahead of
Yes.
time. And, calling a home care company like ours is one of those first steps, because I think if you develop a relationship with a company, one, we should be able to prevent things in the first place. But if someone's in the hospital, hopefully when they come out, we can prevent a readmission at that time, with all the issues and problems and costs that are involved in that. So
Well,
just kind of my thoughts,
yes,
so
I think they're very good thoughts. It's something that we should all be thinking about. Um, and especially as we're going into the last quarter of the year and the holidays, we know seniors tend to, have more illnesses in the wintertime. So let's, take the precautions that we can take and get mom and dad the help they need.
well, and I will say that right now, it looks like, certain things are kind of rearing their head. We're seeing a uptick in COVID. I think this is a little bit silent this time. And they're seeing a lot in the water systems. And just so so um, uh, that is kind of rearing its head a bit. And so we're going to see more things happening, as people get closed in more. Respiratory infections and other things tend to bump up, just with the colder weather. And we went from 80, at least in Ohio last week, to 60, 85 to 65 in
Yeah.
like overnight.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, you're in Ohio.
Well,
So it
at
went
least,
from blazing to
at
fall.
least the sun is shining, so that's a good thing. So,
Yeah, well,
well, thanks
sounds good.
again, and we will talk again next month.
And welcome back.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks.